All right, I want to thank everybody for joining us for today's live webinar entitled Unlocking the Potential of Metadata in Clinical Trials, Driving Transparency and Efficiency Across the Trial Lifecycle. Today's session is going to be presented by one of our own, principal architect here at Astrix, Aldrich Ruiz. I'll do his introduction in just a moment. Before I get to Aldrich, I'd like to take a moment and just tell you a little bit about Astrix and who we are. Aldrich, you can go to the next slide. For those of you who have attended our webinars in the past, we welcome you back. If this is a first time joining us, we're thrilled to have you, and we hope this is one of many that you're going to attend. Who is Astrix and what do we do? We're a consulting company, and we work exclusively in the life science sector, and we have been doing so for over 28 years. We bring a very unique blend of specialized services, both technical as well as strategic to the table. On the technology side of the fence, we pride ourselves on being technology agnostic. We work with a great many vendors in the industry to help our customers put together a R&D technology stack that makes sense for them based on their unique environment. One of the other things we always like to point out is that 90% of the employees here at Astrix globally hold advanced science degrees. So we're very much a science-based company ourselves, helping other science-based companies get to where they need to get to through digital transformation and otherwise. So that's just a little bit about who we are. We can go to the next slide. So I'd like to introduce our speaker for today. So Aldrich Ruiz, again, he's a principal architect here at Astrix. He has extensive domain expertise in both medical practice, scientific research, as well as things like technical solutioning and complex architectures. He functions as a rare bridge between medicine, research, and tech. We're thrilled to have him here with us on our clinical team. With that, Aldrich, I'll turn the reins over to you. I'll come back on at the end and help out with Q&A.
Perfect. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you. Welcome to the Astrix informational webinar series. I'm very excited about the topic of today. We're going to talk about unlocking the potential of metadata in clinical trials. To go over the agenda real quick, we'll cover the current landscape of clinical trials, the complexities around it. We'll give an example of how we have leveraged metadata to drive value to the business. How do we achieve end-to-end visibility? And lastly, what are the opportunities this opens once we have this in place, and once we have all the metadata in place. Before we go into the topic, I would like for you to whether you're overseeing a study or multiple studies, or you're part of a team, just something out of curiosity. If I were to ask you where your studies are at this moment, I would guess that you would answer with probably somewhere along one of the major milestones, like the study has been approved, protocol is being reviewed for approval, or we started with the first patient, first visit, and so on. And what if I were to ask you, how about the milestones in between these? How about the status of these studies in between these milestones? Has somebody responded, or have you had the feedback that you needed to move your study along? Probably you would answer with, I don't know. I guess let me go talk to somebody. Let me go send this email and see where we are with that review cycle, or where we are with this draft review version, and so on. Most of your answers would probably reside in one of these green boxes. And this view is just as an introduction to show you that when we talk about the study progression, we usually tend to be confined within these major systems. However, there's a lot more that goes on into conducting clinical trials, a lot more platforms involved, and a lot more metadata being generated that at this moment we're not leveraging. So this visibility or lack of is not something special. It's very common across pharma companies. And then it makes you wonder why. Why is it that we have so little visibility across all the processes? Well, the main driver of innovation within pharma has been the time to market. How can we reduce the time as much as possible? So a lot of investment has been put into things absolutely required for submission. And as such, many companies have kind of neglected the data that is being generated around processes. And we know that knowing this data plays a very important role in understanding all your activities, the true progress of your product development. And if we were able to unlock this data, we would be able to actually gain a lot of time around those processes that were dedicated to submission. Okay, so from here on, we'll go a little bit deeper into some of the content right now, starting with the current landscape. Just want to refresh everybody's memory or understanding of the product development process, and then dig a little deeper into the complex ecosystem around conducting clinical trials. Okay, so everybody knows on this call, hopefully most of you know that the product development process consists of multiple stages, starting with the preclinical, where you have discoveries. Within preclinical, you have different processes, sub-processes, and so on, leading towards clinical. When the product or a compound is mature, it goes into clinical, and during clinical, we have phase 1, 2, and 3. And once we are done with this phase, we go into the submission process, review, peer review, approvals, and so on. Once we get approval, the product gets pushed into market, we go into manufacturing, then you have the post-marketing surveillance that is also part of the product development. During this presentation, we'll stay within the clinical trial, but this was just to refresh you and to kind of make clear that even though we're talking within the clinical life cycle, at this moment, everything that I'm going to tell also applies to the areas beyond it, whether it's upstream during discovery, but also during the review processes or post-marketing. Okay, so when I asked you the question about where your studies were during probably you would have mentioned one of these major milestones, and there's multiple variations of these. You have a few more, a few less, but these are very common across the pharmaceutical industry. However, what I want you to realize when you see these major milestones is that there are sub-processes that feed into them. And these sub-processes, for example, for the milestone of study design and protocol development, you need to bring a lot of people together to contribute to the protocol authoring process. You have to bring planners, managers, strategic folks to help you with the designing of the study, and all these sub-activities that lead into milestones are supported by different technologies. If you go down the line, you'll see multiple of these sub-processes feeding into that major milestones. The second one being regulatory submission and approvals. You have activities dedicated to the submission, but also there's activities that track whether something has been approved or not, or where are we in the cycle, and all of that stuff, again, being enabled by technology. We keep going down the line, budgeting. All of a sudden, you bring different expertise, you bring legal into the conversation, you negotiate contracts, and in order to do this, you have your budgeting machinery, contracting management system, and so on. And we keep going down the line of these major milestones, identifying sites, selecting and activating these sites. Then you go into recruitment, hire the necessary people. Again, all of these sub-processes having capabilities to enable them and to streamline. And as we go down the line, we get into actually conducting the clinical trials, where a lot of investment has been put into collecting data for submission. The CTMSs and the EDCs all are dedicated for the submission data. And all the boxes that you see on the outer edge are capabilities that support the sub-processes that support the major milestones in a clinical life cycle. Okay, and I'll keep going. I know it's a long list, and it's actually it seems like a long list, but it's a lot more complex than it. There's a lot more handoffs happening during this whole process. One thing that I don't have on this slide is the manual pieces. There's a lot of templatized Word document happening in the background, or templatized Excel form that needs to be populated and is part of a process. All of this stuff play an important role in getting to the deliverables of these sub-processes that lead into the milestones. And this view is only to give you an appreciation of the complexity. And this is a simplified view. Okay. Now I want to go into more of what the metadata is and how we have used it for one use case that I'm very passionate about, which is the biosample management. It's this piece of processes happen within the clinical trials and is extremely important for conducting study and science. So the next section deals with the use case around sample management. And before we go into that, I would like to reiterate the importance of samples in conducting clinical trials. Samples are everywhere. They're an expression of the theoretical knowledge we have. And as such, every time we seek the samples, we use them to come up with new discoveries, to come up with new development. Think about the targets, come up with new compounds, and so on. All these stuff rely on having samples. We're talking about clinical trials, but you have also non-human samples that play a role, but that's beyond the scope of this conversation. Disease mechanism, understanding the disease, having these samples will allow you to actually find better targets, leveraging new technologies. You are able to come up with new treatment options. Personalized medicine basically relies entirely on sample logistics, and much more. So there's a huge samples is extremely important in conducting clinical trials, and as such, we encountered several challenges when talking to clients about um, samples. A lot of these companies, they don't have the ability to tell me at any moment in time where my samples are, or some sample manager would have to log into a portal or would have to go through an email to see an inventory. So tracking samples has been very challenging. Managing samples in-house, extremely crucial to know, for example, if a sample has been assayed, or um, is the sample viable? Has it been aliquoted? How much is left? None of these metrics that I've mentioned are part of the submission data. This is all metadata around samples. The same as tracking consent. The only thing that we need to submit is whether um, somebody has consented to a form. The form is a PDF, but we don't have that metadata in place tagged to the sample that we can, define, clearly say that we can use, reuse, how we use, at what moment in time do we need to dispose of the samples. So as you can see, samples is extremely important within the clinical trials, common challenges across industry. And this is just one example of metadata not being leveraged until now. So to give you a better sense of this machinery, um, the sample organization has a repeatable process where you start with planning for samples, then you have to operationalize the plan, which means contacting central labs, kit creation labs. All of these processes with handoffs interchangeable happen at the same time, leading to actually conducting the study, where you start collecting samples. Now all of a sudden I need to know where the samples are. Have I received them? Um, and then managing the trial. Am I receiving them on time? Is somebody lagging? Do I see many samples being disposed because they're not viable? Once we're done with the sample, it moves into long-term storage or disposal. Either it depends on what has been consented for. And part of the long-term storage also leads into how can I use or reuse the sample for new discoveries, where my consent, all this stuff happening in a manual way uh, before we started invested in the metadata around samples. Down below, you'll see a depiction of the journey that the sample takes. Starting from the beginning, you see the solid lines feeding into the EDCs. These are data intended for submission, and it can be expanded with some more examples. But fundamentally, you have your clinical report form feeding into the EDC. You have your signatures for consent being recorded in EDC. You have all your results being documented in EDC. However, there's a lot more happening around the samples. Okay, to narrate a little bit over this view, from the left, you have your individuals participating in the clinical trial, providing consent and going through screening. Then they have to provide their samples. The samples are collected. Some of them are assayed at the site, but the majority of them are shipped to a centralized location, a central lab, or to analytical lab to perform specialized assays or whatever assay has been these labs have been contracted for. And ultimately, once the study is closed, it gets moved into storage. Okay, so all this process has relied heavily on emails, inventories, manifests being provided to the sample managers. All this metadata was very fragmented. So, for example, for managers to be able to produce a chain of custody, it would have taken them months and months to just collect all of the stopping points, all the samples, and create this journey that the sample took. And from this manual consolidation of metadata, they were tasked with producing the status of the studies. You know, you can imagine that when I'm asked where my study is, and I have to go through all this trouble, by the time I provide my my update, it's already outdated information. So it was always running behind the facts. Same as a sample location, things might be moving without the information getting to the proper people on time. So it created a lot of it took a lot of effort to be able to produce the deliverables. And this is all because metadata has been ignored for years and years. And this is just an example of that. So how did we tackle this? We tackled this by centralizing all the metadata around samples. So we allow results data to flow the way it has always been. So we left that untouched, but we started paying attention more to the metadata, understanding that whole journey, starting from the plan in the lower left corner. How can we incorporate that, the metadata in the plan that we could leverage to create reconciliation reports? Then we first started with mapping the data journey, right? We understood the sample journey, but the data journey not always follows the sample journey. And we learned that during this implementation, where we had to understand where are the touch points between central labs, analyzing labs, and sites with the sponsor. You know, how can we coordinate, standardize, make sure that the central labs provide the information in a way that we can ingest and do something with it. That's what we did, and that is the middle part that you see there. By having the metadata in a centralized place, all of a sudden we were able to track and trace. We were able to combine it with consent data. We were able to combine it with EDC data, and that means that we were able to create cohorts for new studies, and at the same time request for these samples, trigger workflows that would ship them around and analyze them to come up with new discoveries. So the study were being tracked, consent was being tracked. We were able to manage samples at the site, combining them with study information, with clinical information, and all of a sudden we were able to create cohorts of samples that were pushed down for new discoveries. And this huge machinery was all thanks to leaders having the vision to invest in bringing all this metadata together and making something out of it. Okay, so how do we get there, right? What I presented just now is just a small piece of it, small piece of this whole machinery. And the way we get to it is by starting to acknowledge the value that the metadata could bring to the organization. Think about improvement to decision making. Now that I know in real time where my study is at, what decisions can I make to push it forward, to make sure that it doesn't get stuck somewhere? You know, create training materials, for example. Think about enhancing efficiencies. Now all of a sudden you have a visibility of the bottlenecks because you have centralized all of these metadata around processes. Better compliance. If a regulatory agency comes to you, wants to know things, you can easily provide this information, like the chain of custody that would take months, now all of a sudden is through a click, or products where time is extremely important, such as seasonal vaccines and stuff like that. Knowing that helps you work closer with regulators. Resource management, if you found a bottleneck, there's different ways to solving it. You can put more people in it, you can put technology on it, but knowing where the bottleneck is will help you come up with a strategy on how to mitigate it. Risk mitigation, again, having this metadata will allow you to be more proactive as opposed to being reactive. What we have seen continuously is that by the time we know something is wrong, a lot of time has passed, and it will cost so much more to bring everything back up to speed. Well, if we had this information ahead of time, we can easily be proactive and seeing problems as they're happening and solve for them. And proactive, we can take it to a next level, which is how can I implement machine learning, artificial intelligence, new technologies that can actually predict when something will break. Anyway, the next value proposition is improved communication. Having this metadata will set clear expectation upstream and downstream from you. You will be able to tell somebody, like I asked earlier, where are you in the study? You can clearly say this individual is reviewing it, and we expect this individual to release it within the next time frame, for example. And this communication, you can expand it across the whole study life cycle. Enhanced data integrity, better data, better outcomes. So having this metadata improves the data quality. And in this sense, think of it, a lot of people, when they talk about metadata, the first thing that comes to mind is standardization. Standardization plays an important role in clinical trials for sure. However, there's a lot of other data that is considered metadata, and that is all of this helps in producing good data for good studies. Streamlined reporting speaks for itself. The more I know, the more I can report on, the more I can inform others. I can report my shareholders, my portfolio is moving forward as planned and such. And lastly, it opens all these opportunities for new technologies like AI, like I mentioned, like machine learning, and so on. So that was the why. The why invest in metadata is because of all the value proposition. But then we come to the what. How will this look like? What I presented to you earlier, I just focused on this very small section, and I hope you can see it in that view. It's that bottom box there, the place during the clinical trials themselves. However, as you can see, and if I zoom out, you will see that there's a lot of more processes that leads up to there, and also processes after. So the whole way we suggest to bring this together is by having a centralized repository dedicated to metadata of processes, and that can start with having your first use case being the first use case in your repository, but then having a strategy that little by little you expand and you connect another use case, ultimately leading to a future where you will have a mission control like you see here. This is taken from I believe a metro control center, but space agency, we have a mission control where you can see the whole process from left to right, traffic controls, air traffic controls. All of these other industries leverage this kind of oversight and of complex processes. However, in the pharmaceutical industry, we don't have that because we have always been focusing on improving little bits, chunks here and there, investing here and there, with the hopes that you will shrink the whole width of this view that you see right here. Well, by bringing this all together, you all of a sudden you enable these new opportunities. Okay, so the how, as with any new thing, depending if it's new to you, there's certain things that need to be in place. We have developed a framework to just do a little self-reflection. For example, does my leadership understand this, or do I have the support of my leadership to commit to it? can they help me spread the word that we are working towards bringing all this metadata together? Do I have the strategy and resources, the people, the right path, roadmap that I can bring more and more functions on board and start little by little creating this whole view of the study lifecycle? Technology enablers. Do I have already a centralized place for data? Many of these platforms already provide information on a nightly basis, whatever frequency, to a data lake or something like that. That already can be a start. You can use certain data elements within those feeds that are existing to already start your first use case of tracking this across the whole study lifecycle. Data is the next lever. Of course, data is always important. Having it in place, having people share it, will only allow us to actually use it. And lastly, performance and application. So if you come up with a new thing, you need to also be committed to improving it or maintaining it. And in this sense of metadata, it will be adding more and more use cases over time. As you can see, across all these levers, you have different levels of maturity, from lagging to leading, and you just have to start somewhere. And we're here to help you, move you along to the developing to leading, all the way to where you can have something in production, for example, to track your studies, to show your leaders how things are progressing in a very transparent way. Okay, so the last piece I want to cover is what this metadata, what opportunity it opens up. And this is only one slide. Now that we have that metadata, now that we have understood that the study lifecycle is a long process, having visibility in the metadata will allow us to actually invest in where it matters. For example, a lot of investment has been put into protocol authoring. Protocol authoring undoubtedly is extremely important. However, there's multiple sub-processes that are holding up the progression of study that we're not putting time and effort in. For example, generating a plan, generating the consent, generating other artifacts, communication artifact, contracts. All of these stuff can, all of these moments can leverage these new generative technologies to help and streamline those processes. But knowing where they need to be applied is the first step, because historically it has been like throwing darts in the dark. Hopefully, if I invest in this area, it will reduce the time to first patient, first visit, for example. But having this metadata will allow you to actually be very targeted in how you invest and actually invest in where it matters. Having an integrated product lifecycle tracking. So this will help you be proactive. I mentioned this already. But instead of only looking into one area like the biospecimen that we were talking about, now all of a sudden you can look across, and you can think of expanding it all the way to discovery, starting with a compound, for example. What is the journey that this type of compound would take? And start recognizing patterns, to predict how a study will run. And that's upstream. But think about also downstream. Once we go into market, how will how can we keep track of what's happening out there once we send the product into the market? Okay, data is an asset, of course. Once we have more data available, like any other type of data, submission data or sample data, I already mentioned for the biospecimen, how it has been crucial in coming up with new discoveries. There's companies actually developing their biobank based on this metadata. How can we rerun, do sequencing and all this stuff? Very important for new discoveries, but also very important for innovation across one's company. All of a sudden people have access to data, and they will now help you innovate. You become a more innovative company. And realizing the digital transformation promise. So as I've been presenting, between these milestones, you have multiple activities supported by multiple technologies. The promise was that if you invest in digitizing this, all of a sudden everything will be fixed. However, we have seen that that promise is falling a little short. People invested, but they didn't see the entire benefit. However, if you have the metadata connected with each other, now all of a sudden you can start connecting the dots, knowing where you have to invest to actually achieving this promise of digitization. You know, understanding the handoffs. Is this handoff taking me long? You know, I can be conducting a process in a very streamlined way, but if the person after me is still riding a bike and I'm on the Ferrari, I'm still going to be stuck after that person. So, you know, I can invest all I want into that Ferrari, but still not solve the problem, which is we won't get to the destination quicker. Okay. So, in summary, I talked briefly about the complexity of a study life cycle, the left lower corner. There are major milestones that we use. These major milestones are very common. However, there's a multitude of subtasks that lead into the milestones. There's a multitude of technologies or capabilities that support these tasks. And the main goal would be to keep track of all the moving parts. This you can only do by centralizing the metadata and creating this transparency. I talked about metadata in action. I talked about the biosamples, how centralizing the metadata has helped us track samples across entities globally, manage samples, reconciling planned versus actuals, open up opportunity for new discoveries. So, and a clear example of this is we were able to generate reports that in the past would take 3 months in one click, because we paid attention to the metadata. The third topic I covered is how do we convince, or how we go from where we are right now to actually understand the real time, in real time, the status of my business. And that is by convincing leadership, convincing others of the value of the metadata. You know, transforming our organization in one that is reactive to more proactive, allowing us to make the investment in places where it matters. And lastly, I spoke briefly about technology enablers, knowing where you have the major problems will allow you to, for example, include writing assistance within your processes, leveraging large language models for that. Process mining, how can I improve this process? Should I take it out to make it better? We can use technology to redefine the way we do things. But if we don't know where the problems are, it's very difficult to implement. And the last main message there was that you need to know where to invest that will make a difference. And by knowing your metadata, by creating this transparency across the study lifecycle, you will be able to do that. And with that, I'll hand it over to Kevin.
Great. Excellent presentation, Aldrich. Really enjoyed it. Want to take a second here before we get started on Q&A and just remind everybody that joined maybe after I made those announcements that you can ask any questions you want. You type your question into the GoToWebinar panel. It's on the right-hand side, and from there, you know, we'll take a swag at your question. We'll read it out loud. We won't read your name, and we won't read your company. A couple things I need to do here real quick. Let's get the